But it's not a big country, and I think that we have now to look at Israel and say, how big is it? It's tiny. You have to blow up the map in order to see it. The population, clearly, I don't know what the population is in New York State, or New York City has more people than Israel has. But what it has, what recommends it to the world, what makes it famous, is its military. It's an entirely militarized society that would not bear examination by a Jewish population with an anti-war, pro-socialist, anti-racist tradition and history. By the way, I forgot to say one thing about the Jewish tradition. In the late 80s, I spoke at a university in Berlin, and one of the a conference, I can't remember, I spoke there, and I was there, and the women organized a women's tour of Berlin, which I have never forgotten, and which I have always wanted to do again, and in some greater depth. We were on a bus, there were 25, you know, there were various tours that people could take, and this is the one that I chose, which was Women's History in Berlin. And the first place we stopped was where Rosa Luxemburg had been killed by the side of a river. And there's only a little, some kind of plaque that the women have put to say, this is where this great woman died. Then they took us to another area of Berlin, and they showed us that this was central to the great nightlife. What is the film about Berlin in the 20s and 30s?
Cabaret.
Cabaret, where the cabaret really was based. Okay. And they pointed to the fact that the lesbian and prostitute women were really there. I mean, they had a great presence there. And there was a rich Jewish woman who had who had bought a building for women. You might say it was a kind of women's center, but not women's centers as we know it. It was a center for all of those people who were living outside of the mainstream. And in Berlin, there were a lot of people like that. Hookers, lesbian women, bisexual women, artists, you know, musicians, all kinds of creative people and experimental people who were there in this area of Berlin, and which Jewish women, this particular woman and some others, that's what they said, and these were Germans, these were not Jewish people trying to, you know, puff up the Jewish contribution. Jewish women had helped enormously in building, and when I went there I said, well, now I know why Hitler had to kill all of us, because this place here was the forerunner of something that didn't happen again for 30 years. Then it happened, and by that time it wasn't illegal, and nobody was going to kill us for being hookers and lesbians and bisexuals and artists who lived independently and musicians who were experimental with music and who were living in women's communes, etc. So that is a piece of the tradition which I wanted also to mention. So that, you know, what the tradition of Judaism had to offer was what Israel, to make a military state, had to clamp down on, and had to eliminate, to the degree that you can with the internet, had to eliminate from the consciousness of its own people. Pro-war, and I might add, pro-anti-Semitism, okay? The Friends of Israel in the American state, I mentioned two, Ronald Reagan and George Bush. they are, well, one of them was merely anti-Semitic. The other one is a fundamentalist Christian, which is absolutely founded on all kinds of racism, including anti-Semitism. These are Israel's friends. If they had done nothing else, if they had not been guilty of any of the crimes with which we associate it, they would stand condemned by the friends they keep. It's been my experience that many Jewish people feel that Zionism, and the Israeli state, Zionism aside, is their only insurance policy against the gates of the concentration camps opening again. It's the kind of nationalism which is, to put it mildly, not healthy. It is to bypass and overlook all of the concentration camps whose doors are open every day in all kinds of countries. And as Jewish people, we can't tolerate overlooking any of them, and we can't tolerate Zionism. Thank you. Oh yes, and I want to say something. I want to talk about, just mention, so we can discuss it, what to do about it. There is in London right now, and my colleague Michael Kalmanovitz is at it, a conference, a two-day conference against Zionism. The speakers are largely Palestinian, and he told me on the phone this evening that it's very upbeat and they feel that they are getting somewhere finally. And there has not been, he said, the first day, you don't know what's going to happen the second, there has not been a dissenting voice about the boycott and the various boycotts. The Global Women's Strike has been involved in supporting a boycott in San Francisco of a Rainbow Health Food Shop, which is really probably the largest health food shop on the West Coast. And in San Francisco, it has particular significance because the whole city is in many ways an alternative and very socialist city. It's the socialist city of the US. And I understand there's been a boycott and continues to be a movement toward, not there has been a boycott, there's been a movement to a boycott much closer to home in Ann Arbor, which we have tried to follow as much as we can. And the woman, one of the women from that boycott was to come tonight and at the last minute was unable to, which I am sorry about. But I do believe that it is time to put boycotts on the agenda. I was involved, as I'm sure others here were involved, in the boycott of South Africa. And I know that the boycott did not end apartheid. It had something to do with black South Africans. But the boycott helped a lot. And I have to say that of all the parts of the boycott that defeated South Africa, it was the football boycott, the rugby boycott, because the Afrikaners were entirely devoted to that. They could manage without cricket, but could they manage without rugby? And in a way, after the pummeling it got from black South Africans and the pummeling it got from all kinds of other boycotts, the thing that defeated it was that these apartheid people could not live without their international rugby matches. And I think that might well have been the straw that broke the camel's back. You never know. Every society is different. Every situation is different. But boycott is a very effective weapon. Open for discussion.